John Major Jenkins has made it his work to understand a phenomenon that is making its way into the consciousness of people around the world, the meaning behind the end date of the Mayan calendar, December 21st, 2012. While many with a religious worldview see it as synonymous with Armageddon, according to John Major Jenkins, there's an entirely different opportunity here for mankind. A scholar with a gentle and deeply insightful soul, John puts intelligence and grace into this hotly debated subject. Let's begin with the increasing awareness of this date that is looming out there, which is the winter solstice of 2012. Why has this become such a buzz now among the consciousness of people all over the world?
Well, the end date of the Maya calendar, December 21st, 2012, is a true artifact of the Maya calendar tradition. And recently, there's been increasing interest in what this is all about. As we get closer and closer to 2012, it's understandable that there's going to be even more increasing interest around this. I think that people are very interested in this date because it is a symbol of our transformation. It is a symbol of a new chance to recreate our world. There's a lot of different perspectives on the 2012 date, and my research draws from information from the Maya creation mythology. And there are teachings encoded in the Maya creation myth that tell us about this whole idea of transformation and reconnecting with a higher transcendent wisdom.
So it's being interpreted depending on of an individual's belief system. It's being interpreted any number of ways. Some people see it as a cataclysmic event where we're going to have nothing but death and destruction and challenge and so forth leading up to it, and who knows what on the day. So that's more in the fear-mongering category, where the other camp is saying, no, that's nonsense. That's not what it's about. It's simply the end of one time and the birth of another. Okay? So then let's go into how this came about to begin with in terms of the understanding. The Mayans were very astute observers of the stars. Is that correct?
Yeah, they were cosmologists. They blended all these different things into one unified perspectives. They were their science and their religion was unified, you might say. So they sort of defy categorizing in a sense. But yeah, they were tuned into the stars, and they were able to understand certain things about the great cycles of time, the great cycles that surround us. And they did tune into this big cycle, the precession of the equinoxes.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because that's starting to come up more often now. What exactly does that mean, the precession of the equinoxes? And then we'll talk about how they were able to kind of cast timelines in there.
Sure. Well, precession is basically the fact that the stars shift. So our orientation to the larger universe is constantly shifting. And the way that astronomers measure this is with the equinox point. So the position of the sun on the equinox in relation to background features like the stars is constantly shifting, and that's why we're approaching the age of Aquarius, is because the equinox is shifting into a new sign in the zodiac. Well, the Maya were tuned into this process, and a full cycle is 26,000 years. So, astronomers recognize this, and they have their ways of calculating it. But what does it mean? What does it mean for human beings on Earth?
When you go through a full 26,000-year cycle.
Exactly. And where are the beginning points? Where are the end points and the beginning points of this cycle? Well, the Maya had an insight about this cycle. Their insight, I guess you'd basically say that their perspective on this cycle is that it's not so much a circle, which it's hard to sort of figure out where the beginning and end of a circle is. It's more like a breathing out and a breathing in. So human beings and human culture and we on Earth are coming into closer union with, as we breathe in the cycle of precession, we're coming into closer union with our cosmic heart and source. And as we breathe out in the great cycle of precession, we're getting further and further away from our cosmic heart and source. So it's not so much a circle, it's a moving in and a moving out. And the insight that the Maya had is that the beginning points of this great cycle is when we come into union with the center of our Milky Way galaxy. And that does happen. It happens once every 26,000 years in the cycle of precession. And that's what 2012 is really about. Because in the years around 2012, the December solstice sun is lining up with the center of our Milky Way galaxy.
So what you have done is taken the ancient wisdom and knowledge that is, it's there for anyone to look at if they can interpret it in the tablets, etc. And you have overlaid it with some cool software called Easy Cosmos. Basically, you've taken it and you've put the various, what would you call them, the fixed points in to calculate what actually happens on the day of December 21st, 2012. And what did you find?
Well, I found that there's a very rare alignment that's happening there. And the Maya were tuned into this alignment. And it's an astronomical fact that for many thousands of years, the December solstice sun, which the Maya called First Father, the first solar lord, has been slowly moving through the stars, through the constellations. And as we've been getting closer and closer to 2012, it's coming into union with the bright band of the Milky Way galaxy. And specifically, that part of our Milky Way galaxy that contains the galactic center, the center of our Milky Way. It's right between Sagittarius and Scorpio. So in the years around 2012, the first solar lord is lining up with the galactic center. And the galactic center, the Maya thought of as the cosmic womb of the Great Mother, the cosmic heart and source of the universe. So it's the union of cosmic mother and cosmic father, and that's what's culminating in the years around 2012.
So they created a calendar that would lead us, the people in this period of time, to these understandings when the time came, it appears. How can you just give us a very brief overview of how that calendar is constructed and why you think they would have done that? Why they would have had such a far vision and bothered. I mean, there's a lot of work that has gone into this, a lot of information left behind to be rediscovered.
Well, to answer the first part, or the second part first, it's because the alignment in question is like the supreme transformative moment for human history. And it's the supreme moment of opportunity for human beings to come back into union with our higher divine selves. And so to get into the long count calendar is the calendar it's the 2012 calendar. And it's basically made up of 5 place values, and they're sort of like nested cycles of periods of days. The smallest cycle is the day cycle, the kin, and then there's 20 days, which is the huinal. Then there's 360 days, which is the tun period. It's almost a year, just under a year. And then 20 of those tuns is a katun. And that's just under 20 years. Some people think that it relates to the conjunction cycles of Jupiter and Saturn, which is just under 20 years. And then the cycle of the baktun is 20 katuns, and that's just under 400 years.
And that's 144,000
That's right.
days, which is really quite interesting because this number appears in the Bible. What is it that is sacred about 144,000?
Well, I think it's one of those interesting numbers. It's 12 squared times 1,000. So it's one of those interesting numerological numbers. And the Maya were very, very interested in how numbers relate to the sacred science principles of the cosmos. They really had a sacred science in which they understood how in nature, in plant growth, in the growth of trees, in the unfolding of human beings, there are these number cycles, and they're not just simply numbers. These numbers have qualities. Like, for example, the core building block of the Maya calendar systems is 13. It's a 13-base philosophy of time, you might say. And the reason why 13 is important to the Maya is because there are 13 phases of the moon. This might seem a little counterintuitive because the moon cycle is 29.6 days and half of that is 14.8. But the Maya were not interested in abstractions like that, in using numbers as some kind of calculational abstraction. What they actually saw is that when the moon first appears in the western sky as a little sliver, the first sliver of the new moon, it's actually like a day after moon dark. So when they count from that first appearance of the new moon, 1, 2, 3, 4, until it's full, it's 13 days.
13 days.
So that's really a philosophy in which they see things unfolding to... it's really a philosophy of time in which things are born and they grow and they maximize and then they decay and they decrease and then they're reborn. So the moon waxes to fullness and then another 13 days it wanes and then it's reborn at moondark. And it's this beautiful cyclic cosmology of time.
So it's not just the Mayans that had this understanding either, is it? I mean, isn't there evidence within Egyptology, etc., that this time was coming,
yes,
perhaps counted a slightly different way?
Yes.
Can you comment on some of the other ancient cultures that had this same awareness and were astute
Sure.
observers of stars as well?
Sure. Ancient cultures around the globe were tuned into this insight, into the cyclic nature of time. And it works on the moon cycle, on the level of the moon cycle. It works in the solar year cycle, and it works in these vast cycles of time like the precession of the equinoxes. For example, one example I would bring up would be the Hindu Yuga system. The Yugas are periods of time, and it's part of a world age doctrine, very much like the Maya had their own world age doctrine. And most world age doctrines have to do with these vast cycles of time.
Like the Bronze Age.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And most of these world age doctrines are definitely connected with the precessional cycle. So the Yuga system, like the Greek system you mentioned, in which you have the Golden Age and the Silver Age and the Bronze Age and then the Iron Age, the Yuga system is like that. There was in the Yuga world age doctrine, basically about 13,000 years ago, there was a golden age, and human beings were connected into their cosmic heart and source. There was a direct, I guess you might say that the perennial wisdom was visible for all to see.
And these were considered higher civilizations as well in terms of understandings of mathematics, astronomy, etc.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And that's somewhat counterintuitive too, because today in the Western science model we have this idea of progress, that our primitive ancestors were less sophisticated than us in all ways. But this Hindu idea is actually the reverse of that. And I'll explain why in a moment. It's because 13,000 years ago, if that was the golden age, and human beings were much more sophisticated and enlightened and turned on at that time, then there's a degradation that took place.
Yes, the Dark Ages.
The Dark Ages came.
Right.
We moved into greater eras of spiritual degradation and spiritual darkness. Well, that's just part of the natural cycles of time, because as with the moon cycle, half of that cycle is when the moon is moving from full to increasing darkness, and then it's reborn in complete darkness. And then the other half of the cycle, and this is part of what 2012 is about, is the other phase, or the other half, is the half in which we are increasing towards the next golden age. So 2012 really is sort of the anchor point of this shift.
So you could say it's really the nadir.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, that has some a golden lining to it, which is simply that we are able to start increasing our consciousness from that point forward. But it also means we've sunk into some pretty low depths of consciousness,
yes, that's true,
on one level.
But there's a very special energetic quality about the nadir, because it's the still point. It's analogous to in Vipassana meditation, and this is why I used the analogy of the breathing out and breathing in earlier. In Vipassana meditation, which is based on focusing on the breath, there's a special focus on the breathing cycle, and the maximum out breath is a still point. And that's analogous to what this nadir is about, the 2012 still point transition from increasing darkness to increasing light. In that still point, we have a great opportunity to transcend time, to catch a glimpse of that perennial wisdom.
And doesn't it appear that there is a greater duality that also seems to be forming at this time, where you have consciousness that's shifting into really almost a dullard status, our senses being so dulled by exterior stimuli in the material world, and then the other part, which are people who are really searching for something beyond the material world.
Yes.
It does seem some polarity is
That's kind of what I refer to as the end times dynamic. At the end of a cycle, this is just sort of an insight into the energetic properties or things that emerge at the end of a cycle. Like you say, there does seem to be an increasing polarity in the world today. Things are pulling apart and getting defined to opposite extremes. And that is just part of the process, because out of that extreme duality, out of that extreme polarity, and there's a lot of craziness that happens during those times. A lot of the shadows in our civilization and in our own personal lives are coming out of the closet, screaming for attention, screaming to be integrated so that we can achieve a kind of wholeness. And when these polarities reach their extreme maximum extension, it's in that middle point is found. So in a sense, like polarities as they manifest at the end of a historical cycle like we have going on now, it can give rise to these crazy situations of, like, if you're not with us, you're against us, or it's us against them, these kind of situations.
as evidenced everywhere right now.
But for those who can walk the middle path and balance the two extremes, that's the path through to the future.
And staying out of judgment as to what's going on, because it's each individual soul's way of contending with it. And so this is also, there was the work of a man named John Daring talking about other influences that are affecting this. So you're talking about the cosmological effect of the precession of the equinox and the elders' innate understanding, higher wisdom that we are experiencing right now, basically laying this out for us to see when the time came. But what about the notion, if you care to comment on other factors coming into play, such as electromagnetism, the magnetic fields that are going on, pulling further away as we reach the nadir? Aren't the fields considered to be somewhat more dissipated, so to speak, the magnetic fields?
That could be from a scientific perspective, as science tries to language or explain in empirical terms why there's so much accelerating transformation going on in the world today. We can talk about magnetic fields, we can talk about electrical energetic fields, and as I see it in the great cycle of precession, we've been moving closer and closer towards that still point maximum.
Right.
So in one of my books, Galactic Alignment, I drew from a scientist and philosopher, Oliver Reiser. He had this model in which once every precession cycle, for some reason, the energetic fields of the Earth, there's like this diminishing or this null point. And so the protective cover that the ionosphere, the magnetic belt around the Earth, protects us from all these incidental rays that could do great harm, that there's an evolutionary event that happens. Now, I personally think that this is kind of too ingrained in the Darwinian model of the evolution of physiological forms over vast periods of time. But I think that the human mind, consciousness, responds more quickly to these energetic changes. So it is an astronomical fact that we are, in the years around 2012, are the axis of the solstices, the solstice axis with precession is lining up with the center of the Milky Way galaxy. Now, to me, that is a very compelling and very empirical, astronomers have calculated it. It, to me, is the empirical signifier, the event in which we sort of line up with that which can transform us. And I also just want to say one other thing, too, is that science is struggling to language these things, and I think that a really more interesting place to look is Native American traditions, because they have an intuition as to what these cycles are about. They can look at the moon cycle, and they can meditate deeply, not just analyzing the moon cycle from a scientific perspective, but meditate deeply on what the meaning of that cycle is, and thereby gain a real inner understanding in the heart about these larger cycles, including the big cycle towards which we are about to complete right now.
And they have a beautiful saying, you might know it by heart, I just remember little snippets of it, talking about the elders released information to the public at large, which was very rare, talking about these times, saying this is a time where we need to let go of the banks of the grass on the banks of the rivers and allow ourselves to be swept into the river without fear and see who's there with you.
Beautiful. That's beautiful, and it reminds me of the teaching that's encoded in the Maya creation myth, which really is a spiritual teaching. In my book, Maya Cosmogenesis 2012, I showed how the Maya creation myth is encoding the astronomy that culminates in 2012, and it has to do with the first solar lord coming into union with the cosmic mother, and that's all encoded in the creation myth. But there's also this very profound spiritual teaching encoded in the creation myth, and it has to do with letting go of our illusions. That has to do with how much we cling to our egos or our individual selves, or what I like to say more is that we cling to our illusions, and that keeps us in a place of limitation. And the reason why we cling to our illusions is because we're afraid. We're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid to let go. So it really can be what it really boils down to in regards to 2012, in regards to really any traumatic event or decision that we have to make in our lives, we can choose to respond to that with fear or love.
Would you say that the Mayans were concerned about us at this point in history, and that is why they went to the extent they did to leave this information behind for us so we would know when the times were coming?
I think that that's probably true. I think that the Maya have a universal sort of galactic perspective on things, so I think they were concerned about humanity. They were concerned about the future survival of humanity, because in their creation myth they also talk about it's a world age doctrine, so they talk about the previous world age, the ending of the previous world ages.
And what do they say about that?
Well, they say it's spoken of in metaphors, like human beings had to, when the flood came, human beings had to transform into fish in order to survive, and there's 3 other world ages that end. But the point is that human beings always have to transform themselves into something completely new in order to survive into the next era. And they do that, human beings can do that by opening up in love, opening up, not clamping down in fear, but opening up to the transformative energies of the universe. It's like there's nothing to fear with what the universe is up to. The universe is trying to evolve us. Our own spiritual evolution is not so much something we do, but something like a blessing that we open up to.
So that was their gift. That was the Maya gift to us.
I think that the Maya gift to us is, specifically in regards to 2012, and it's kind of a sort of a half miracle that the stones of Izapa, the carvings of Izapa, have survived down to us today. And Izapa is the place that invented the calendar that gives us the 2012 end date. So it's almost like it was a sacred ceremonial site. It was an initiatory site into this cosmic wisdom, this galactic perspective, this alignment that occurs and offers to transform human beings. So I think that is sort of like Izapa is sort of the stones of Izapa, the carvings, and the message preserved at Izapa is something that is preserved for us today.
It seems to me then that the challenge for us, as certainly as a Western culture, is to perhaps get over ourselves, get over our own arrogance and our own understanding of science at this point in history, and begin to acknowledge that we weren't the first game around.
Western civilization has a huge superiority complex. Especially the scientific paradigm, thinks it is the arbiter of all knowledge. It won't even use the term wisdom, because wisdom implies some kind of inner spiritual connection with truth. And the scientific model, the scientific method, doesn't really ascribe to the idea that you can come to any kind of understanding of the universe by delving within or meditating deeply on something. The scientific model is all about data gathering and making postulations and, all these, proofs. And, that has its place. The reason why there was an ancient metaphysics, we speak of metaphysics, and metaphysics is really a physics that can include all the forces and principles and equations that physics talks about, but there's also this meta perspective that embraces the component of human spirituality and what you might say the physics of human spiritual transformation. And you find this in many of the world's traditions. There's the metaphysics of spiritual transformation that are spoken of in Tibetan mysticism, with the 7 chakras and the way that we can awaken the different spiritual centers by yoga and meditation and that kind of thing. So the point here is that the Maya also were tuned into this ancient metaphysics, or what I refer to as the perennial philosophy. And so the cosmology and the spiritual teachings of the Maya, it's not just some backwater southern Mexico thing. It's really a beautiful, brilliant connection into the perennial philosophy, the primordial tradition. That tradition of our ancient ancestors that was directly aware, in an immediate Gnostic sort of internal sense, of the universal principles that create and sustain the universe.
So from there, where are you headed as we start counting down, or counting up, toward the beginning of the new cycle? Where is this work taking you now?
Well, I feel that I've sort of come full circle in the last 20 years or so, where I got launched into this path by my own inner awakening, my own work with yoga and meditation. And I've walked down this path of writing these books and doing this research. And I've come back to, my own work to remain centered and to be doing my own spiritual practice. I think that part of my own mission is really to be a teacher about these things, and to be a teacher not about my own personal ideas or interpretations so much. I mean, I have my own sort of unique discoveries that I've made in terms of reconstructing the ancient Mayan wisdom. But I think that my mission is to be a conduit or a conveyor of this ancient perennial tradition, the principles of transformation that we can all tune into. So as we get closer to 2012, certainly there's going to be a lot of, as you said at the beginning of the interview, as you said, there's going to be so much increasing interest. There's going to be a lot of noise, too. So I only hope to be a voice of clarity.
To understand more about the precession of the equinox, the 26,000-year cosmic cycle of consciousness, check out our interview with Walter Cruttenden. Cruttenden is making waves in the world of astrophysics regarding the precession as well, only he has an amazing spin on it. Try this one on. We may have not one, but two suns. Until next time, thanks for watching.